My name is Kyle, and I'm thrilled to celebrate this amazing, amazing day. Can you give my table guy a round of applause? Woo! I love you guys. I want to stop and just say a huge welcome to those of you who are guests with us. Maybe you were drugged here by a family member, you're from out of town. Maybe I get to see you twice a year, Christmas and Easter. We're just so glad that you're here. We hope that you feel like you are loved and part of this family. You are not only welcome, but you are wanted here at Life Community Church. For the last few weeks, we've been going through a series entitled The Last Week of Jesus' Life. We've been walking day by day through the last week of Jesus' life, Jesus' bucket list, what he wants to do before he dies. And it's all been slowly leading to this day, this climactic, transformational day. So people have been wondering, well, what are we going to do next? What's the next series going on? I'm like, hey, let's just celebrate Easter. But for those of you who are wondering what we're doing next week, we're starting a new series next week entitled The Unmentionables. You see, we live in a day that's more divided than any day in my brief lifetime, where there's topics that everyone seems to talk about, but you can't talk to each other, you only talk about each other. There's these important conversations we need to have as a country, as a church, as neighbors, around politics, race, human sexuality, divorce, mental illness. And we don't know how to talk about it. Oh, we sure know how to blame, shame, yell, and accuse. And so we next week are going to lean into this difficult conversation. And we're going to start next week talking about these unmentionables, because we've got to learn how to have some clarity and compassion for each other. But that's next week. But this week is Easter Sunday. Now let me begin by giving a little bit of a confession. I want to share a secret that most people, when I tell them, it's so unbelievable to them, most of them gasp. So here we go. I am an introvert. Now some of you are like, wait, I see you and you're going around on Sunday mornings talking to people, getting to know them. No, let me be clear. I made a deal with God. I'll be nice to large groups of people for 3 hours a week, but the other 165 hours I get to myself. And then I had kids, so either God or I didn't do our side of the deal. And then there's no place in my life where I feel more introverted and have more desire to be alone than when I'm on an airplane. Now, the thing is, every time I go on an airplane, there's this heightened anxiety inside of me because I don't know where I'm going to be seated and who's going to be next to me. For those of you who don't know what it's like to not know where you're going to be seated, you have more money than I do, and you don't fly on cattle call airlines. You get to pick your seats because I don't know how that works, but I stand in line and wonder and hope it's going to be a free flight and I can be in the middle and like spread out and no one talks to me. I can put on my headphones, I can open a book and people leave me alone. But I know on a full flight what's going to happen. I'm going to get seated next to one person with big, broad shoulders and another person who's chatty and lacks self-awareness. The inability to read a social situation. Even though I put on my headphones and read them, they're going to keep asking. So I found out how, as an introvert, to get out of that conversation that I don't want to be in anymore. And here's how it goes. After a while, I get to a point where I don't want to talk anymore, and I look at that person and I say, "What do you do for work?" And they tell me. And they do the polite thing and respond, and they say, "What do you do for work?" And I say, "I'm a pastor." And they, whoop, whoop. Praise the Lord. The greatest calling. But one time I was in a conversation that I actually wanted to continue. I'm like, what am I going to do if they ask me what I do for work? Because I want to keep talking. I'm like, I can say I'm in the nonprofit world, but that seems kind of vague and pretentious and self-aggrandizing. And so the first thing that came to mind is like, I'm in the word business. You're a professional Scrabble player? No, I wish. But I'm in the word business. I tell stories that help people locate themselves and locate God in this larger story to make sense of this chaotic narrative that we call life. And this morning I come to you as someone who's in the word business, ready to preach on Easter Sunday, and I want to be crystal clear. There are no words that I could ever find that explain the glory, the mystery, the beauty, and the transcendence of what happened on Easter Sunday. I don't have the words for it. Don't worry, I've tried to find the soaring prose and oratories to reach into the heights of the heaven to talk about the mysterious love of God, or the illustration that takes us into the depths of our sin and need for a Savior, or to wrap my arms around the amazing, inclusive, wonderful love of God. And I just can't get there. And even though I don't have the words for it, I got 25 minutes, so I'm going to do my best. And I want to tell some stories. And I hope when you walk out of here, you have new words, new language to locate yourself in this story. So that when you walk out of this room, you look in the mirror and realize that Easter Sunday is not something that happened 2,000 years ago, but Easter Sunday is something that happens every single day. And every single day and moment of your life is filled with this Easter movement from life to death to resurrection. And God continues to make dead things alive, including you. So let's tell some stories this morning as we try to unpack the mystery and the beauty of what happened on Easter Sunday. If you have your Bibles, you can go to Mark chapter 5. Mark chapter 5, you do not think is an Easter passage, but what happens is a foreshadow of what's going to happen on Easter. Mark is one of 4 gospels, 4 stories about Jesus' life, and it's a story that gives us a picture of who Jesus is, what his ministry is all about, and what it means for us. So if you have your Bibles, your device, you can follow up with the Bible on the screen here. We begin in Mark 5:21. When Jesus had crossed over by boat to the other side of the lake, a large crowd gathered around him while he was at the lake. Then one of the synagogue leaders, one of the pastors, associate pastors named Jairus, came and saw Jesus and fell at his feet and pleaded with him earnestly. "My little precious daughter is dying," Jairus said. "Please come and put your hands on her so that you might be healed." So Jesus went with him. You see, Jesus is getting popular. There's crowds around him. He's getting popular. Why? Because he's handing out free food and free health care. It's a quick way to become popular. And so people are following him around, and all of a sudden, Jairus, this guy who's a religious guy, he follows all the rules. He knows all the Bible verses. He grew up doing flannel graph on the felt board when in Sunday school growing up. He knows how to act and dress and do all the things the church folks do. But at a time, he got to his life where he realized that his life, no matter how good he was at following the rules, was not going to work without Jesus. Because his daughter had a diagnosis that they did not know how to solve. They were looking death in the face and realized they had no answer for death. And when there's no answer for death, what do? You call on Jesus. So Jesus says, "Yes, I'll go with you." And I imagine as any other dad would say, "Oh my gosh, this is amazing. There's going to be an answer to my prayer." I imagine that Jairus is like a dad or a dad-to-be trying to get his wife to the hospital, clear the way, put on the sirens, out of the way. We're trying to go. We got to go. Get to the hospital quick. And as Jesus is following Jairus, as there's hope that this little girl might have new life, all of a sudden, Jesus gets interrupted. I won't read it, but I'll paraphrase. There's a woman in the crowd who reaches out and touches him, and Jesus says, "Who touched me?" And all the people are like, "Jesus, have you gone crazy? There's 1 million people here. Anyone could have touched you." He said, No. Someone touched me. I felt the power go out from me. And he stops and looks at this woman who had her own diagnosis that the doctors couldn't solve, who'd been struggling for years. And he stops and looks at her and has a moment. And in the middle of that moment where this woman's life is changed by an encounter with Jesus, this is the news that Jairus gets, verse 35. While Jesus was speaking, some people from the house of Jairus, the synagogue leader, said to them, "Your daughter is dead. Why bother the teacher anymore? Your daughter is dead." You been there? You've been at a place where hope is dead? Where you asked Jesus for something, you prayed and you prayed and you prayed and you thought Jesus was going to answer because he loved you, said he was going to be there, and then Jesus disappointed you because he didn't come through. You have a diagnosis, I can't solve it. You have a relationship with someone in your family that's so broken that you don't know how to fix it. You have a dream for your career that dies. Hey, Jesus, why didn't you come through for me? For some of us, death is not something outside of our own control. An unanswered prayer, some of us have brought death with our own choices, with the way we chose to treat a spouse or a family member, with a poor decision we made, for choosing one of your hurts, habits, and hang-ups and choosing to prioritize that over the health of yourself and people around you. And we're confronted with the death of a little girl. As a parent of two, I couldn't imagine how Jerry's heart sinks knowing that his precious, sweet baby girl is dead. The little girl that he brought home from the hospital, terrified that car seat wasn't adjusted just right, that he threw ball with growing up, that he took to the father-daughter dance in junior high, that he looked forward to the day that he'd walk her down the aisle and do his very last father-daughter dance with her at her wedding, would now never happen. It's the death of the daughter and the death of a dream, and Jesus didn't come through. Let's keep reading. Overhearing what they said, Jesus told them, "Don't be afraid, just believe." Real quick, if I'm in the midst of the greatest pain, trial, and loss of my life, and you come after me with a fortune cookie, get out of the room because I'm going to deck you. If I'm in tears and you come to me with, well, everything happens for a reason, you bet to get out. If you come to me with this, oh, God's got a plan, or at least you're not like one of those starving kids in Africa, our relationship's done. You come at me with a cheesy Christian fortune cookie, and that is not big enough for my pain. That Band-Aid does not cover the gaping wound of my heart. If I was Jerry's, I'd be looking at Jesus and wanting to deck the dude. And I'm a pacifist. I just lost half the audience with a throwaway joke. That was bad. Don't worry, come back next week. We'll learn how to talk about things we don't know how to talk about. There's no saving your mouth. Okay, here we go, 37. Jesus didn't let anyone follow except for Peter, James, and John, the brother of James. They came to the home of the synagogue. Jesus saw the commotion, the people crying and wailing. Essentially, the funeral processions have already started. The funerals can be up to a week. They hire professional grievers and mourners. There's this movement towards the funeral that's already started. She is clearly, obviously, measurably, scientifically dead in every way. And Jesus went to them and said, "What's all this commotion and wailing? The child is not dead. She's merely asleep." And they laughed at him. Oh, this is good. They're in the middle of a funeral. Everyone's dressed in black. They've got those like second-rate snacks after the funeral just ready to go. And everyone's there crying and grieving. Parents are brokenhearted. And some crazy guy walks into the funeral and says, "Why is she in the casket? She's just asleep." What? Laughing is the only thing that makes sense here, because we all know death has the final word. She is dead. It's over. She's merely asleep, he says. Why would he say this? Verse 40, and they all laughed at him. But he put them out, essentially create a moment of privacy, and took the child's father and mother and those 3 disciples with him where he was. He's alone in the room with just the parents, just his 3 closest followers. And look at the details here. There's some details. He took her by the hand and said to her, "Talitha koum," which means, "Little girl, I say to you, get up." Immediately, the girl stood up and began to walk around. She was only 12. At this, they were completely astonished. They gave her strict orders not to let anyone know about this. And I love this detail. This is the heart, the care of Jesus. And Jesus said, "Don't tell anyone." Why? Because no one asked a dead girl to prom. They don't want her to be the freak zombie girl forever. Shh, this will be our secret. She's only asleep. And give her something to eat. If you've been dead that long, you're going to be hungry. Where do I even start? He looks at her and says, "Talitha koum." He speaks to the dead person. And somehow he speaks into death and new life comes. You see, what we get here is a glimpse of what Easter is all about. Even though Easter won't happen for years after this, what we find out is that Jesus and his ministry, Jesus on the cross and in 3 days in the tomb and his resurrection says, I have not come to make bad people good. I have come to make dead people alive. Y'all didn't hear me. Let me say that again. He says, I have not come to make people better behaved, better at following the rules. I have come to make dead people alive. I have come to look at a situation that looks like it's death, no hope, clearly, measurably, undebatably dead. And my presence, you put death in the hands of Jesus, and death has not conquered, but death is merely sleep, because in my presence, I can make dead things alive. And friends, in this church and in this world, we become way too good at trying to make bad people good, and we forgot about making dead people alive. And on Easter Sunday, I want to put death and legalism on notice and say religiosity has no place here. A while ago, I was taking my dog on a walk in a car that I'd never seen before. Makes a U-turn, it comes towards me, and there's a woman who rolls down her window, and I see her face, and I'm like, uh-oh. You see, last time we had a chat, it did not go so well. I was a youth pastor. Her daughter started coming to our youth group. The mom went to another church, and she was telling about all the struggles that her teenage daughter had. And I listened, and I empathized, I asked questions, I probed. And the mom kept saying, I'm so worried about her faith and her grades and all these things. And at the end, I got to a point where I said, are you more worried about your daughter following the rules than you are about your daughter following Jesus? She did not like when the 25-year-old with no kids questioned her parenting. It did not go well. So when she made that U-turn, I thought she was coming after me. She said, for 8 months, I've never been able to forget that question. And it reminded me why God gave me that daughter. Not to make her well-behaved, so she got good grades and good schools and a good life, but to point her towards Jesus. Because there's life in Jesus that the rest of the world cannot offer. The rest of the world is offering death through success, accomplishment, and achievement. But in Jesus, there's life, and there's life abundant. Friends, let me tell you, I love that just down the hallway in Life Kids, our kids are walking through the stations of the cross and walking through Jesus' crucifixion, death, burial, 3 days in the tomb, and coming back to life. Don't get me wrong, I got a 5-year-old. His favorite part of coming to church is decorating Easter cookies out there. All he could talk about is all the candy and Easter bunnies and all this. I get that's his favorite thing. But this morning at the table, because Josiah went to Life Kids last night and walked through the stations of the cross, he looked at me and said, Daddy, did you know that Jesus was dead and God rolled away the tomb and God brought Jesus back to life? And I'm like, no, Josiah, tell me more. And I love that my kid is reminding me that I've spent so much of my life trying to get him to be well-behaved, and I'm telling you, that's a lost battle for many reasons. But he reminded me the true meaning of Easter is that God has come to make dead people alive. And what I want to tell you, what I said earlier, is that this happens every single day. This is not a great fairy tale that we tell of what happened 2,000 years ago. This new life, this movement from life to death to resurrection is the rhythm that our lives go through every single day, whether you realize it or not. Let me tell you some stories. A few weeks ago, I was having that afternoon slumber. You know that moment where you're like, maybe I didn't sleep enough, maybe my lunch was too heavy, maybe I should move to Spain where they do siesta because it's 2 o'clock and I just can't get through the day. So I did what people do. I went to Starbucks to get the one and only drugs that Christians are okay with. Coffee, that is, just to be clear. I know we're in California, but they're still just serving coffee, last I know. Gosh, that's 2. I'm in trouble. I need to wrap this thing. Here we go. So I go and I grab my tall, blonde vanilla cappuccino, and I walk through, and I'm in this little introvert paradise, having my thing, looking up at the sky, and all of a sudden, there's this car that comes up, honks at me, and I'm like, who's the knucklehead that almost hit me with the car? And this woman's looking back back at me is like, who's the knucklehead who's walking out into the street? And then all of a sudden the window goes down and I'm like, that knucklehead goes to my church and I'm her pastor. Or was her pastor until this moment. She says, I got to tell you a story. I'm like, okay, we're in the middle of the street, lady. What's going on here? She's like, I just got to tell you. She's like, I got a son that's about your age. And I'm like, oh my gosh, I know how this goes. Another person in my church telling me they got kids older than their pastor. I know how this joke goes. As if I'm not insecure enough. Let's just layer it on, lady. And she's like, what you need to know is that for the last year and a half, my son hasn't spoken to me. Oh. Which means for the last year and a half, I haven't been able to speak to my grandkids. My grandkids and my son that used to live with me. I used to wake up early so that the mom and dad could sleep in. I'd go get special grandma and grandkid time, and I'd make them their special breakfast, and it'd be just perfect time with Grammy. I haven't even seen them, talked to them, text them, FaceTime them in a year and a half. They've even moved out of state. She said, my relationship with my son is dead. And then, for reasons I can't explain, he texted me. And then I tried to play it cool, and then he called me. And he said, hey, do you want to come out and visit with us? And she's like, be cool. You're a mom, but be cool. Be cool. Let me check my schedule. Yes, I want to come and spend time with you. And she said, and then do you know what happened next? I got to FaceTime my grandkids. Last week I asked her, I said, what happened? She says, I don't know, but it was a miracle. My relationship with my son was dead, and now Jesus has brought it back to life. You see, she's living in that movement, life with her son, that moved to a dead relationship for reasons, to be honest, she still doesn't know. And now, by some miraculous way that she doesn't understand, God is resurrecting and bringing new life out of it. She's living in the movement, in the rhythm of Easter, from life to death to resurrection. And friends, this is wired into creation. The way God wired and created the universe has this movement of life, death, and resurrection wired into it. Let me prove it to you. A little science, not too much, don't worry. But I'm a nerd, so you got to deal. Some of you have seen this around your house. We call this dust. Some of you call it disgusting. Some of you don't know what this is because you've got a great housekeeper or a really detail-oriented spouse. But what you might not know is that what's going on in this dust is, yes, some dirt from outside, some pollen, especially in this area. But one of the primary ingredients in dust, you may or may not know, yes, dead skin cells. Disgusting, I know, right? Hey, bro, don't worry, it gets better. Did you know that your body every single day sheds about 1 million dead skin cells? Every time you bump into something, dead skin cells. You shake someone's hand, dead skin cells. You have friends over and you clean up afterwards. To clean up after your friends, you got to clean up more than just the dishes. Why? Because your friend's dead skin cells are there. Disgusting, right? Why? Because your body has been wired to live into the rhythms of life, death, and resurrection. Because the same one who created you when he spoke the universe into being, the same word that created the world is the same word that submitted himself to becoming a human. That word then died on a cross, and that word was then brought back to life. Why? Because he lived in the life, death, and resurrection. We see it everywhere. It's obvious. Last April, I was trying to buy a house. I saw this beautiful house in Roseville. The backyard was gorgeous. I love it. And 6 months later, the whole thing was dead. And now what's happening? It's coming back to life. We call that weeds. And whatever my wife was able to keep alive, even my backyard is living in life, death, and resurrection. You ever seen a movie where someone dies and comes back to life? There's echo of this epic narrative. Maybe you just watch Disney and that like monkey or baboon or whatever he does takes the lion and holds them up like, there's a circle of life, friends. Even Disney knows that we are living in this rhythm of life, death, and resurrection. So this morning, friends, I ask you, where are you in this rhythm? I met someone a few weeks ago. We had this Next Steps lunch. It's a way I love to meet new people, hear how they got connected to the church, help them feel connected to the ministry and relationships so they know that they're not alone. So they got people, a family that they can be a part of to do this spiritual journey together, because we can't do the spiritual journey alone. And I went to go meet someone. You could tell she had 2 young kids. She maybe had a third on the way. I asked my wife, hey, when am I allowed to ask if they've got another baby on the way? And she said, when the head's coming out. Okay. So I asked, hey, how'd you hear about our church? I'm always curious. A lot of people, move from the Bay Area where houses are more affordable, job transfer. I know a lot of folks were like, oh, my spouse or my kids drug me here, but I don't want to be here. I'm like, what's the deal? And she said, oh, we're here because our house burned down in campfire. And we've been displaced here. We're living in a homeless shelter with my 2 young kids, my third on the way. My husband hasn't been able to come and join us yet. But last night, your church hosted us here, the homeless shelter, the gathering in, stayed here, and I made a friend with someone. And that friend came and picked me up and brought me here, brought me to this lunch, cared for me. And every week I've walked with this person, and every week it's been one of 2 things when I see her. We either jump up and down and celebrate what God is doing, or we cry and we weep and we say, oh my gosh, this is so hard. How are you going to get through? How many more days can your kids survive in this place? How many more days till your husband gets a job? When is your long-term transitional housing going to come through? What's going on here? And every day she realizes she's living in this circle of life, death, and resurrection. And she's a reminder to our entire church that no matter where we are joined arm in arm with people who are going through this movement of life, death, and resurrection. And friends, some of you are here, you are experiencing good times, and you are in the fullness of life. And what I want to tell you is we're here to celebrate with you. Some of you are in struggles. Your marriage is falling apart and it feels dead, so dead, measurably dead, clearly dead, and you just don't know how to fix it. Or you've got a career that feels dead and you just don't know what's going to happen next. And what I want to tell you is that the story is not being done written, and we as a community move through these rhythms together. And that you are not alone. 1, because Jesus went before you with his life, his death on the cross, being dead for 3 days in the tomb, and then being brought back to life miraculously, says that he has conquered death, he has conquered evil, and there is no power that has the last word. He says to you the same way he says to that little girl, Talitha Kaum, get up and walk. Why? Because death has no power, because death has been defeated, and evil has no power in the presence of God. And that which feels dead to you is only asleep in the presence of he who conquered death forever and ever and ever. Amen. So friends, as you walk out the doors today, I pray that you see yourself in this movement of life, death, and resurrection. And knowing this Easter story is not just a good fairy tale that was told 2,000 years ago, but it was a historical reality there that has changed the course of human history. And even today, we find ourselves in the story. But I got to be honest. As I said at the very beginning, I feel like I don't have the words to describe it. I've spent this time using my words to tell a story that talks about how you are involved in this movement from life, death to resurrection, whether or not you realize it or not. But there's another side to the story. There's Jesus' side of the story, Jesus' perspective. And I couldn't quite get the words for it, so I invited my good friend Isaiah to come and share the Easter story from Jesus' perspective. Will you do me a favor? Put your hands together and welcome my good friend Isaiah as he comes and shares.
Allow me to borrow your attention for a moment. Amen. Travel back with me to Gethsemane. The sun stood still in a distant memory, far away from daylight. No array of time had a presence because time didn't belong. My chest throttled with depth and gusto. Far beneath the surface of my pecs was my innermost being. a concave organ too exhausted to impress upon itself a way to be empowered to do the task it was made powerful to do. Empires crumble in my mind at the truth of a daydreaming future, distracted, subdued, too distracted to be subdued by pain, breaking through to another silent and dull moment of a paradoxical existence. I sing to the wind, you're beautiful, you're wonderful, you're powerful, you are so marvelous, so majestic, all powerful, you are. But still, it is not satisfied. Wind will not be satisfied until it is the breath in the lungs of the sons and of the daughters of my Father. Until humanity has abundant life. Rivers are not satiated until they are the current of our blood rushing through our veins. The sun cannot be comfortable until it is the light beaming through our eyes. In your eyes, I see life, vibrant and thrashing about as the ocean at sunset. In your eyes, I see you, and I see me, and I see them. Somehow you have been allowed and even chosen to host the personhood of a previous people's vision. The life in me sees the fruit in you and it wants it to grow and to help it grow. But if you taste of it now, you'll never know what ripe is. If you bite of it in the presence of a new generation, you'll understand why time is transcended by love. You'll understand why I had to come. But then you'll understand the meaning of death. Can I tell you about the feeling we call strength? Can that be an appropriate first chapter to a narrative I'm hoping you'll read and carry on long after today? Let's say that it can. Let's say I ran down the ideas of this book ahead of time and that there are no surprises. You already know what you're getting into. Music elicits praises or sings a story of pain and threatens to leave you subdued, but the message is the same. Satan, there is a price on your head. There is no glory in feeding you the dead, but when you thought I was dead, I embarrassed your plans and lifted my foot to stomp on your head. There is no glory in leaving things unsaid. When I stretched out my hands and pointed horizontal, Papa pointed vertical. He said, devil, you choose, but you cannot stay here. My children won't be made victims to fear. There is no bed for death. There is no newfound rest. There is no bed for sin. Our souls, it won't digest. I would rather die than remember your sin anymore. In the crevice of my bloodied ribs, be reborn. In the corridor beneath my bloodied eyelids, be reborn. In the shadow of a bullying death, be reborn into the scores of a furnace that cannot burn us with a natural flame. Let there come a day where the tongues of fire bathe us. Veils are torn, where earthquakes shake us. Pentecost shapes us. In a world parts for redemption, I am water. Like forceful rapids, I cannot be stopped. Our keys to the doors of tomorrow are seated within the heavenly imagination in the lap of the one on the right hand of the throne of the Father. Crucified Jesus, the only accurate picture of a God the world has ever seen, but you can be my reflection. The cross is spoken. The end is written. Darkness fell, my friend's state hidden. Hope seemed to sleep, but heaven started counting to 3. And I sang to the wind, you're beautiful. You're wonderful. You're powerful. You are so marvelous, so majestic, all powerful you are. And when they arrested me in Gethsemane, they gave permission for a king to be crowned in victory. And all of heaven counted to 3. Amen.